Hi, my name is Alicia, this is Feta, and you're watching the Reptile Rendezvous. So over the weekend, I actually went to the Granby Zoo in Granby, Quebec, and I thought that would make a pretty interesting video for you guys. I know this video is going to be a little bit different than my usual content. I will not only be focusing on reptiles in this video, but also other animals. But as someone who loves all animals and not just these scaly little guys, I think you guys might also enjoy this video. In this video, I'm going to go over my 5 favorite animals and exhibits I saw at the zoo and also talk a little bit about the care that I witnessed there. And to keep this intro short, let's get on to the video. So the first section I actually want to talk about is the Oceania section that had a walkthrough exhibit with wallabies and black swans. As soon as you go through the little farm animal section, you get into this section, and I was impressed. First of all, the enclosure was actually pretty nice. It was very reminiscent of the outbacks you see in Australia. As well as this, I just thought that the concept of a walkthrough exhibit for these animals was so cool, especially because being from Canada, these are not animals I regularly see at all. I will say the wallabies definitely were my favorite, but seeing the black swans was super cool because I'm so used to seeing white swans, so being able to compare them in real life was a cool experience. I will say the wallabies did tend to stay away from the visitors, but that could either be due to them just being shy, or it could be a stressful environment for them, which I would not personally prefer that alternative. I think the idea of them being constantly stressed out by visitors is pretty upsetting, so hopefully they're just shy, but it is a zoo environment and the animals do tend to be stressed in most cases. That being said, the enclosure was actually pretty large for the amount of wallabies I actually saw in it, so I was pretty impressed by that. There was also a small kangaroo section in the Oceania section, but I did find that the enclosure in this section was honestly a little too small for them, but I will give bonus points for the baby kangaroos because they were so cute. The next section I want to talk about is actually the cave system that was full of different reptiles and cave dwelling creatures. I honestly expected it to be a room with 4 walls and just have cave dwelling animals in it, but when you get in, it's so intricate and so cave-like. I genuinely believed I was walking in an actual cave. There was flowing water going through the cave like what would happen in real life, and there was lots of different crevices that didn't even have enclosures, just places you could explore as if you were in a real cave. And there was also plenty of enclosures. I actually saw one of my dream species there, Taiwan beauty snakes. I love this species of snake, and being able to see one this close and in an environment that is honestly so cool was such a fun experience. There was also a children's python, which was super interesting because we did talk about them in my last video, but I will say some of the enclosures were really nice. The Taiwan beauty snake's enclosure, for example, was very large and had plenty of different enrichment opportunities for the snake. Unfortunately though, some of the enclosures weren't as nice. The children's python enclosure, for example, had a red light and a lot less space for it to actually utilize, but bonus points because there's actually a viewing window to view the bear enclosure from the inside of the cave, which was super interesting because it's kind of cool to be in the bear's perspective of a cave. The next entry on this list is actually more so a specific species, and that was the Japanese Serow. It's actually the first time I think I've ever heard about this species, and to see them in person for the first time was honestly so cool. They're such an interesting looking species, and I never would have imagined an animal could look quite like they do. They were also climbing all over the enclosure and seemed pretty sociable, as they were actually following us in a sort of way where if we were standing at a different viewing point, they would come towards us. There were also red-crowned cranes in the enclosure, which I thought were so beautiful, and if you've ever played Planet Zoo, they are actually one of my favorite animals to add to enclosures because I think they're so cool looking. The enclosure itself was actually really nice. I loved all the different areas that the animals could actually utilize. Now, I don't really know enough about this species to determine if this was enough space for them, but in my personal opinion, I think the enclosure was really cool, really well made, and I loved seeing and learning about a new species of animal that I never knew about before. The next section is by far my favorite section of the entire zoo, and that was the African section. There were so many animals in these enclosures that I had never seen before, and if I had never seen them in this healthy and happy of condition. I visited a safari as a kid and actually saw some of these animals in that safari, which is also in Quebec. I will refrain from saying the name just because I don't really want to start anything, but this safari specifically, the animals looked very stressed and didn't really look like they were enjoying their lives. But at the Granby Zoo, the animals were exhibiting natural behaviors, which is already a really good sign of their health. The enclosures were actually pretty big, and the animals weren't overpopulated in the enclosures, with there only being a few elephants, a couple giraffes, and a small herd of zebras, as well as only a couple rhinos, etc. It really was not an overpopulated population, which is a big difference between some zoos that I've seen. Another crazy experience we had, we were looking for some fruit bats that they had listed as species in the enclosure, and we didn't really know where they were, and we looked up above our heads, and in the tree on top of us there were fruit bats perched sleeping, and that was a crazy experience because being that close to bats that are so often feared, and they were just sleeping there looking super cute, it was a really cool experience. I also loved seeing the flamingos and the lions close up because they are some of my favorite animals. I will say it was raining, so it was kind of hard to get a good view of the lions, but seeing the flamingos in the water, it was so beautiful. There's also a small indoor African section that had mandrills, ball pythons, and hippos, which is also super cool because I've never seen a hippo in person before. So being able to see two of them was really, really cool. And the final entry on this list is actually the South American section. The outdoor enclosure for the alligators honestly seems so similar to what they would have in the wild, and it was so cool to be able to see them almost in a natural habitat. In the indoor section, there were so many amazing animals, and one of the ones I was the most in love with was the sloth. I love sloths. They are one of my favorite animals, and being able to see one in person like that, so up close, and it looking so healthy and comfortable was honestly just so beautiful, and I loved it so much. There was also a few tortoise species, basilisk lizards, which I talked about in one of my videos, anacondas, and also some dart frog species, which were all super, super cool to see because some of those animals I had never really seen in person. Like a basilisk lizard, seeing that in person was so interesting after learning so much about them. Some enclosures were better than others, but I will say all the animals looked healthy and well cared for. None of the animals looked like they were suffering from any diseases or famine, but of course a zoo is only going to show what is their best, right? If there's an animal that is sick, you wouldn't be able to see it. I will say in general though, my experience at the Granby Zoo was actually very pleasant. There was very few times where I looked at the animals and felt that they were not having a good time, that they were stressed and not cared for correctly. Most of the animals were just hiding away because it was raining, but I will say that did make the zoo a lot less busy, so it was a lot much more enjoyable to be able to walk around when there wasn't tons of people. There was also a small amusement park and a water park, which I think added to the experience and just created a lot more fun memories for me and my family. If you are in the area, if you are near Granby, Quebec, I definitely would recommend checking out Zoo Granby. I think that it is a very good zoo. I don't necessarily agree with zoos most of the time, but this one, they take care of their animals very well, and it's not a zoo where they just have animals to have animals per se. I think that the different needs of each animal are being cared for correctly, and I think that's a really positive thing to look at when you're looking at zoos. But that's the end of my little recap of Zoo de Granby. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I would definitely recommend hitting that subscribe button as well as that notification bell so you know every time I post a new video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.